more about SAEON's involvement in the development of a coastal greenhouse gas observing system in South Africa. So for those of you that are not involved in carbon research in whichever way, this is just a brief introduction as to why do we need a coastal observation network on this topic. So 83% of global carbon cycle is circulated through the ocean, and of that, 50% is sequestered by and originates from coastal habitats. Yet coastal habitats only occupy about 2% of the ocean's surface, so they have a disproportionate sequestration capability. But on the other hand, 48% of global methane emissions come from aquatic ecosystems, as you see in that middle graph at the bottom. But there is a great paucity of data for the coastal zone, but also for the Southern Hemisphere and Africa, as you see in the figure on your right-hand side. So the land-ocean aquatic continuum serve as a very important greenhouse gas source or sink. And you see that I say source or sink, and it's because for most of the coastal ecosystems, we don't know whether they are sources or sinks because very little research has been done in the coastal environment. Your top right-hand figure there shows the number of documents on this topic in coastal habitats around the world. And you can see there's a major gap in Africa with just a few countries that have been active in the past. So air sea fluxes from greenhouse gases from or to coastal ecosystems is not well constrained from that top graph. But also if you look at the bottom graph, that shows you the changes in air sea flux around the world. And the big problem there is that we are seeing in some areas that you can see the changes, but in other areas we've actually never sampled. So we don't have data to measure if change has been taking place in these habitats or ecosystems. So these fluxes can vary markedly, and although individually they are small, collectively from all the coastal ecosystems, they scale up to a global impact on atmospheric CO2 variability. So it's very important that we get to understand these changes and fluxes in the coastal environment. So estuaries are known sources of carbon dioxide and methane and also nitrous oxide now recently because of net remineralization of terrestrial organic carbon at both global scales and from research done by the CSIR and UCT and DFFE, we know that the coastal ocean is currently viewed as a sink of atmospheric CO2. So by coastal ocean, I mean the oceanic component, the open water component joining the coastline, not the habitats within the coast, such as the estuaries. So we recently did a study on all available information on carbon research in Africa. And if you look at blue carbon observations, this is probably the strongest network in Africa. If you look at that map, you can see over 2,380 blue carbon samples have been collected and archived in the coastal carbon network. The actual amount of samples collected is actually far exceeds this number because these are just the actual ones that have been archived with the Smithsonian Institute. And you can see that the majority of the research is centered around Southern Africa. If we look at ocean acidification, so there are 24 countries that form part of the global ocean acidification network. Some countries are much more active than others, and most often these are driven by individuals or very specific institutions within Africa. And the GOA-ON also gave these kits to South Africa, Mozambique, Mauritius, Ghana, Nigeria, Cameroon, and Benin, probably about between 5 and 10 years ago. And it has had a limited success due to resource constraints within Africa. And if we look at the most active countries that are active in ocean acidification research, it is those 4 countries: Kenya, South Africa, Ghana, and Morocco. If we look at greenhouse gas observations, you will see that most of the greenhouse gas flux data from coastal ecosystems such as salt marshes, mangroves, seagrasses, etc., are mostly restricted to one-source studies. And these are these little red stars that you see in this figure. South Africa is the only country so far with a long-term greenhouse gas flux program in Africa. Not globally, but in Africa. And this started in 2023. So there's an urgent need to fill the gaps, especially in North Africa and West Africa, and to establish long-term observatories in all these areas. All right, so the big question is, why is there such a paucity in data in the coastal habitat? You would think that there would be a paucity in data in the offshore environment, because you need a big ship, you need very expensive equipment, you need the expertise to understand the carbon cycle, analyze the samples, and so forth. But yet the biggest gaps are in the coastal region. And the reason for this is because the coastal environment is so complex. It's characterized by multiple processes such as estuarine outgassing, continental shelf pump, blue carbon, ocean acidification, blue nitrogen, etc. There are multiple habitats. The coastal areas are, there's rivers, salt marshes, mangroves, seagrasses, kelp forest, upwelling zones, etc., that constantly change over time. You have multiple biogeographic provinces and bioregions. So, for example, the estuary on the west coast might function differently biogeochemically to an estuary on your more warm, temperate, or subtropical east coast. And then, of course, you have to consider all the temporal scales. So from hourly changes within an estuarine system due to tides, diurnal, fortnightly, monthly, seasonal, and then, of course, we've got extreme events that can completely change an ecosystem in a very short period of time. So this seminar will focus on some of the research that we have done for two projects. The one is the EU Horizon funded project that has come to an end, and we're just busy writing the final report. And that is the Knowledge and Climate Services from an African Observation and Data Research Infrastructure project. And we formed the Ocean Pilot Study. And the second project is a project funded by the National Research Foundation called the South African Integrated Carbon Climate Observation Network. And the principal investigator there is Pedro Montero from the University of Stellenbosch. And that project is ongoing and will be continuing for at least another year and a half or two. All right, so the purpose of the CARDI project was to build a comprehensive concept for an African research infrastructure, and our focus, as I said, was on the oceans and coastal biogeochemistry. So we had consultation workshops with African stakeholders. We co-designed a coastal observation network. Then we rolled it out, or planned it for South Africa, co-designed it with local and regional scientists active in this field. And then the final part of this project will be to establish a committee to take this further and roll it out in the rest of Africa. So what I will be sharing today is, some of our pilot study concepts. So just in terms of the workshops we had a workshop on surface ocean CO2 in Belgium with quite a few representatives from Africa joining that. We had a training course on coastal carbon science and monitoring on the Ocean Sciences campus here in Gqeberha, where also 13 early career scientists from around the world, around Africa, came to us for training. And then the last workshop we had was a hybrid workshop on opportunities for integrating African coastal carbon measurements into a global observation networks. And this was about a month ago that we had it in Casablanca. All right, so going back to South Africa and our pilot study sites. So with the CARDI program, we had two pilot study sites, St. Helena Bay on the cold temperate west coast of South Africa, characterized by a lot of upwelling, nutrient-rich area, lots of harmful algal blooms. On the east coast, we've got Algoa Bay in the warm temperate area, bioregion, characterized also by upwelling, wind-driven upwelling, and recently also area characterized by a lot of phytoplankton blooms, including harmful algal blooms. And then for the NRF-funded project, we've selected a third site off the mouth of Utugela, or the Utugela estuary area. And that is so that we also have a subtropical region to see if the carbon and the other greenhouse gases would differ between these three bioregions. And the reason we selected these sites is because they had major rivers flowing into the areas, so we could study the entire land-ocean aquatic continuum. From the terrestrial environment, we've got observations from SAEON's terrestrial nodes, as well as the SMCRI research infrastructure, all the way through into the estuaries and into the coastal ocean. And the plan with the NRF project is also to look offshore using research ships as well as marine robotics. And then the plan eventually would be to add a fourth site, which would be False Bay. All right, so for the pilot study, we looked at a range of different observatories, from very costly to a lot more affordable, because we want to look at the full range, the full spectrum of observations that could be possible within Africa. So the first one is a fixed stations collecting continuous measurements. So these are your basic moorings that are permanently in the water. They are the most costly, and this was aligned with the protocols established by ICOS in Europe. So we have procured the moorings, and Sea Technology Services in Cape Town is just putting the final touches to these moorings, as you can see here, and they will go into the water hopefully within the next few weeks for testing for about a month or two. And after that, they will be deployed at the first two sites, which is St. Helena Bay and Algoa Bay. And so these moorings will be equipped with a sea surface partial CO2 sensor, which will be a VGAS PCO2 sensor developed by the CSR and Sea Technology Services. And it will also have an intake in the air above the mooring, so we can do air-sea flux. At the moment, they were developed with a SAMI pH sensor, but we've just ordered the new seabird pH sensors, and these will be incorporated into the moorings as we speak. Then part of the mooring will be a moored seabird CTD, collecting data on temperature, salinity, pressure, pH, dissolved oxygen, chlorophyll A, turbidity. And it will also be equipped with the Suna V2 nitrate sensor, because it's very important that we include nitrate and other nutrients in these real-time data collection. Then it'll have a thermistor string with a UTR I say they every meter, but it's probably more likely going to be between 1 and 3 meters. It'll have an ADCP on the bottom measuring currents and waves. It'll have a surface climate module at the top measuring rainfall, wind, etc. And the frequency of data collection will be once every hour. So we are still hoping that we can deploy the first ones by the end of this year, although the years run away with us. So it's probably more likely that the first ones will go in early next year. And the plan is to have these labeled as ICOS marine stations by 2027, say 2028, around there. There's a lot of work that we need to do. We need to show that there's the quality control of the data is good, and they will then come down and check the systems that they can incorporate this into the global networks. All right. So that was the first one, the big one. It's quite expensive. All up, you're probably looking at about 10 million rand for each of those moorings with all the instruments and sensors. That is excluding the maintenance required around these, which would be quite intensive. The next one is fixed stations, discrete measurements. So this is taking a vessel going out to a site repeatedly and collecting data at that site. So this will piggyback on our pelagic ecosystem long-term ecological research sampling, which we've been doing monthly in Algoa Bay since 2010. So we've got a long data set there already. And at the other side, St. Helena Bay, KZN Bight, we are looking to start off quarterly and then maybe move on to monthly. But we are planning also monthly sampling in False Bay, also starting in 2026. And during this sampling at the station, so the vessel will go to the station, will lower a CTD, collecting all the data with a CTD. With Niskin bottles, we'll collect water samples, analyze them for nutrients, and also collect water samples for analysis of all the carbon species, as well as PCO2, total alkalinity, DOC, DIC, POC, etc., etc. We are also working with CSIR and Sea Technology Services to develop a V-gas partial CO2 underway analyzer. So very similar to the one on the SA Gallus, but we will make it significantly smaller so that we can run it on small coastal vessels and craft, as long as there's a pump and an underway system pumping seawater through it. And depending on the success, we might have several of these stations around the coast at all the main sites. And then, of course, we also collect some data on essential biodiversity variables such as chlorophyll A, phytoplankton, and zooplankton at these sites. According to ICOS, you can sample these. The minimum that you have to sample them is once a year, but of course, we will sample them much more frequently. All right, but this is also still very costly if you think of rolling this out to northern Mozambique or something like that, because you need a dedicated vessel and you need all the equipment, but more importantly, you need the laboratories that can analyze all these samples. All right, so just to show you some of the data that we've been collecting, this is some of PhD work of students from SAEON and SAEON looking at pH variability as well as partial CO2 data. I'm not going to go into the data, but just that there is some data already available on the East Coast. And then the third observatory that we investigated was greenhouse gas, using greenhouse gas fluxes measured through chamber measurements. These are much more affordable. You're looking at a couple of million rand once-off procurement for the instruments, and thereafter the cost of collecting this type of data on carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide is not too much. So it's quite easy for most research laboratories and countries to operate a system like this. But it collects really valuable data. You can quantify the emission pathways and seasonality in trace gas fluxes. And at the same time, when we measure the fluxes from the coastal habitats and ecosystems, we also collect sediment samples and water samples. So we measure what is, the carbon content, say, for example, of the estuary itself, of the sediment at the bottom of the estuary. We do cores. We slice the cores and collect sediment samples and analyze them for all the species of carbon at our laboratories that we have in Gqeberha at the moment. So this we started in November 2023 and have been collecting very valuable data. I'm not going to go too much into this, looking at the difference in flux of CO2, methane, and nitrous oxide from mangroves versus salt marshes, estuaries on the west coast versus east coast, etc. Just to say that it's quite clear that our estuaries are net emitters of greenhouse gases, despite their considerable sequestration capability of carbon in the sediments. And then the last one is blue carbon stocks. As I mentioned, lots of data in Africa on this. This is the cheapest and the easiest of all the carbon observatories to collect the data. You basically collect the sediment using cores, You basically dry ash, mill the samples, analyze particle size. If you have the funding, you can do lead dating. And then if you have the instruments, you can also measure all sorts of other species of carbon, which we can do here, but not all the countries in Africa have got access to this type of instrumentation. And then you do the same, not only in the sediment, but also in the vegetation to look at the carbon stocks. And this is just some data. I'm not going to go into it, but this is one area that researchers around South Africa has been very active in, collecting a lot of data on the sediments and the vegetation and the blue carbon potential, sequestration potential of our coastal habitats. But this image I just put down here, which was published recently, shows how much the biomass has changed, for example, in the Swartkops estuary from 1981-82 to more recently, about 5 years ago. So the problem is you cannot do this once off, basically, and expect that to stand as the carbon stocks in a system, because this changes over time. Apologies for the noise in the background. So that's why it's very important that you look at changes over time in stocks. So what we do is we set up rod set elevation tables so that we've got a good understanding of sediment elevation change in all our systems. We're also using remote sensing. We get a good understanding of vegetation density, canopy height, etc. And we have our own airborne remote sensing platform to do this, but you can also do it using remote sensing products from satellites. And I think especially the PACE hyperspectral satellite products especially would be very useful in understanding how the biomass changes over time. Some of the data that we've collected in recent past shows that, you know, our phytoplankton, for example, in our coastal ocean changes significantly in the last 10 years. So if there's an increase in the abundance, say, of diatoms versus dinoflagellates, that would have an effect. That would have a major impact on the carbon sequestration potential of your pelagic environment. All right, and then I think I've got 2 more slides left. It's very important to do your work not in isolation, so to keep up the regional and global links. So we have had discussions with SOCONET, which is the Sea Surface PCO2 network within the Global Ocean Observing System. We've also had discussions and collaboration with the Greenhouse Gas network, which is currently being established, and the pre-operational phase is underway. And we're also talking through the CARDI project, and our continuation with the NRF project is looking at low cost or medium cost sensors for carbon research, specifically looking at blue carbon stocks, carbonate chemistry of coastal water, and greenhouse gas flux measurements. So not really looking at your discrete collection of data using moorings and vessels, because they are still too costly for most countries in Africa. And then finally, there are 4 regional laboratories have been identified within Africa. They are in South Africa. We've got a lot of capacity through BioGrip as well. Morocco, Kenya, and Ghana, and they will become regional centers of excellence in coastal carbon research. And we are in the process of establishing an African Carbon Science Committee, and I would like to invite everyone on this call that are interested to drop me an email if you would like to serve in some way on such a committee. And the purpose of this committee would be to map available expertise and infrastructure, to promote collaboration and develop Africa-specific standard operating procedures and protocols, We are planning to use the observing system simulation experiment to help optimize the design of an ocean observing and coastal observing system in Africa. We will use the existing networks, long-term observation networks in Africa, and expand them to include carbon. And they will also identify also serve on the Greenhouse Gas Watch and SoccerNet regional committees. And that is it from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tommy. That was a very interesting talk, and it's cool to hear of some of the nice things that are happening here, and that there's plans to expand them and get these African networks going and to work with other people across the continent. I'm going to open it up now for a little discussion Q&A session. So if anybody has any questions or anything they'd like to ask, please do so now. You can do it by raising your hand. I think that's the easiest way. Or if you'd prefer, you can also make use of the chat, but we'd prefer to hear from you. So yeah, does anybody have anything they'd like to ask Tommy about these cool projects that are coming to create these kind of networks and this? Yeah. No questions so far.
Great.
There you go. Lucian, do you want to ask your question?
Sorry, I was looking for the unmute. Tommy, I see that there could be overlap or potential collaboration between that International Atomic Energy Agency and this African sort of network, because they're also trying to do the same thing. And the countries where the hubs are that you show now is exactly some of the countries where they supplied equipment to. I think it was Morocco, Ghana, Kenya came out as the countries that have capacity. So I think there's good overlap for the two.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, thanks for the question, Lucian. I should actually have mentioned it. So the overlap is actually intentional. We have included the Atomic Energy Agency in our discussions, and because of their distribution of instruments and technology, they've basically created these centers of excellence already in those 4 areas. And we've included them in our consultations going forward. But there's still a lot of discussion and collaboration that we need to enter into with them specifically, to try and build on the laboratories that they've already established. So they are more on the laboratory side of things. And so what we will do is not tread on their toes, but rather focus more on the SOPs and protocols for field sampling and the collection of data that can then be analyzed in those laboratories. But as you rightly pointed out, it's a partnership between what we are planning and what they are planning. They are well aware of our activities, and so we'll be working very closely together to maximize also from their perspective the use of their instrumentation that they've provided. Something that came out in our workshops is the fact that is to build capacity, essentially. So they've got these very expensive equipment from the Atomic Energy Agency. They've had some training and leave. And so what we are hoping to develop through this African Coastal Carbon Committee is to make sure that these centers of excellence, maintain their excellence. And we will do this through continuous training, capacity building, and also assisting surrounding countries in those areas.
Cool. We'll chat more.
Thanks. Yes, no, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Lucian. And Tommy. Anybody else have any other questions? Anything they'd like to ask?
Hi, Caitlin. It's Pedro Montero here. Sorry, I couldn't
Yeah, go
actually
for it.
rotate where I can raise my hand, but anyway, so I'll just burst in here. Tommy, thanks for a great talk. So, I mean, you touched on it, but really this issue of the land-ocean coupling is a really, really, it's a major gap. And I see that, it's nice to see that you're putting in the pieces to be able to get to it. It would be really good, and I think SAEON is best suited for this, is that, that the SAEON land and ocean nodes, coastal nodes, actually set up a joint research program to pin that down. I mean, it's probably it is early days. You're still putting in the capabilities, so I understand that it hasn't happened. But that would be such a big, and one major gap there in the instrumentation is DOC.
Yes.
Just constraining. If you look at terrestrial, well, in fact, the entire carbon budget of the region, we have no idea how much of the carbon budget on land is ending up in the ocean, and where it can actually end up, where we end up sort of double counting it in a way. Yeah.
Yes.
So that's a real opportunity, and particularly for you guys at SAEON to do and really sort of get it done. Yeah, but otherwise, yeah,
Yes.
congratulations. I think you guys are doing a great job. Yeah, cheers.
Thanks, Pedro. Yeah, I think through your project, and we will, and it is through your project that we identified those sites, St. Helena Bay, Algoa Bay, and Utugela, not only because of the rivers flowing into those systems, but primarily because of the terrestrial nodes' activities in the catchments. So we will definitely try and link our terrestrial and ocean coastal nodes together through your project primarily. And yeah, as you say, hopefully, this is a fantastic opportunity to really look at the entire system from the land to the open ocean. Thanks. Am I breaking up, Caitlin? Because
you're okay. It did earlier, but you're okay now.
okay.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that question and comment. I think it is quite a nice space to be in, that we can start linking the different aspects of SAEON in this carbon space as well. Anybody else have any other questions? You've got quite a few comments in the chat that just said that it was a very nice talk. So yeah.
Yeah, and I noted Nuet's comments as well. I will definitely get hold of Jerome and include him. There are many initiatives, of course, happening at this moment in Africa. I think quite a few people are at the WIOMSA conference this week, and it's quite a big focus is blue carbon.
Perfect. So one last opportunity for any other questions, or we're all good? Okay. I just want to say thank you to everybody for coming to the seminar. I hope you all learned a little bit about some of the exciting things that are happening in this coastal kind of carbon space and expanding it across the rest of Africa and creating these partnerships and stuff. And thank you for Tommy for an interesting talk. And we hope that you guys will all be able to join us next month. I will be sending out the details soon. But yeah, it will be the first Thursday next month. So yeah, thank you everybody for joining us and hope to see you next time. Bye everyone.
Everyone,
Thank you and bye everyone.
bye-bye.
Bye.
Yes.